Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 2023 Queensland Sport Oration. My name's Tim Clark, I'm the CEO of Q Sport, and welcome to the first chapter in what is a new event for our sport, for our industry, and for our state that celebrates and explores the power and the positive impact of sport as a force for good in our communities at all levels. Thank you very much for being here. I appreciate the traffic was particularly bad this evening, so thank you for battling that to join us this evening. There are still some people that are coming in. If, like me, you're anticipating a really great conversation tonight, I don't think we're going to be disappointed. I'm genuinely pumped for tonight's conversation. Thank you very much for sharing it with us. I begin this evening by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we gathered this evening, the Turrbal and Yagara peoples. I pay my respect to their elders past, present and future. And I acknowledge the extraordinary and sustained contributions that our First Peoples have made to sport at all levels through their stories, their histories, their cultures, their knowledge systems for a very long time in this country. And I particularly acknowledge that sport has been played on these lands for tens of thousands of years, which feels like an important acknowledgement in the context of what we're here to talk about tonight. And I particularly honour and welcome descendants of our First Peoples who are here in the room and a part of the conversation tonight. Thank you. I want to get to the core business of this evening, so I'm going to whiz through some brief housekeeping and then invite Sarah up here to the microphone. I want to acknowledge as well this evening and thank the Queensland Government for its support through the Department of Tourism, Innovation and Sport, and thank the members of the department that are here this evening. Thank you for ensuring that we're able to do something new for the industry, which we're really excited about. Housekeeping bathrooms are either side of the very large structure that you walked in past as you came in. Smoking, I've been told, is not at all on campus, so your best place for a smoke is in the dark, out there in the gardens. Turn right and just keep heading that way towards the river. Fire exits, we follow the instructions of the staff tonight in the extremely unlikely event of a fire. And those instructions follow the Tiu, who's around with a sort of a bright red cap on, and we follow her instructions this evening. You're very welcome to share your reflections, your takeouts from tonight on social media. Please tag Q Sport so we can respond and be involved in the conversation with you. I also want to welcome Mel and Madison tonight, who are our Auslan interpreters for the evening. Thank you very much for being a part of the night and doing what you do. Thank you. I want to flag also that Tom's here with a camera in his hand. Thank you. And Dylan and Julian are recording our event tonight so that we get an opportunity for you to watch it back if there are pieces you want to see again, and we can share the conversation across the state, which I think is a really important part of our work as an industry. It's now my very real pleasure to introduce our inaugural Queensland Sport Orator. Professor Sarah Kelly OAM is the head of QUT's Graduate School of Business, an experienced commercial lawyer, non-executive director across sport, tourism, technology and professional services sectors. Sarah is a member of the Brisbane 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games Organising Committee Board, Deputy Chair of the Brisbane Lions AFL Football Club and of Tourism and Events Queensland. Sarah is recognised globally for her work and her research, her expertise in this sport field, particularly across areas including health and the social impacts of esports, mega event legacy evaluation, sponsorship in sport, sport integrity and governance, sports diplomacy, and the hot topic right now, women's sport commercialisation. She is the Queensland chapter co-lead for the Minerva Network, which provides pro bono mentoring to elite sportswomen nationally. And in 2021, Sarah was awarded the Order of Australia Medal for her services to sports administration and to tertiary education. Please join me in welcoming Professor Sarah Kelly to deliver the inaugural Queensland Sport Oration.
Thanks very much, Tim, for that very generous introduction, and thanks everyone for turning up tonight. I know the traffic can be pretty tough at this time in the evening. And firstly, I too would like to acknowledge the Yagara and Turrbal peoples as the original owners of Meanjin, on which we're gathering tonight, and their ancestors, of course, who played the first organised sports. They're emerging leaders, most importantly, as we walk with them in reconciliation towards 2032 and beyond together. And, you know, in that spirit, it's really important to emphasise that together, in fact, is a core value of Olympism and Paralympism. And it's obviously a very strongly embedded value in the Queensland DNA through our very unique community sports ecosystem. So Tim, thanks for the invitation, but I just want to deal with this oration business first up. I do admit, and I'm really comforted to hear maybe some of the other panellists have had to Google it as well. I had to Google, the thing I was interested in is what is the difference between an oration and a speech? And what I found was, through the chat GPT thing, it's a formal speech delivered in an eloquent and dignified manner. So, Tim, I'm sorry, I'm pretty informal. I'm not at all eloquent, but I'll try and be dignified and on best behaviour. The origin, obviously, of the orations was 2,500 years ago in ancient Greece. And there may or may not have been heckling and provocation from the audience in those days. I'm not sure, but it does seem appropriate that it was ancient Greece given the topic for tonight. So well led, Tim, and a great initiative. I think it's fantastic. So this morning, and in fact, often, and I know you can't tell, but we often go swimming out at Chandler and do some laps in the morning. And it's really amazing. I've really enjoyed it for many reasons. Obviously, you feel better. But on the one side, we've got the elite dolphins training, seriously, in the lanes next to us. On another side, we've got a group of high schoolers in their squad training. And then as we're sort of stepping out of the pool, we've got some of the Paralympians coming in to train, and some also an elderly sort of squad that comes in. It's more a social thing from what I can see. They're always talking. But it's an amazing example of bringing together organised recreational, elite and community sports in one place. And the thing is, I have reflected on this, and there's also the Winter Olympians elite training on a Saturday morning as well, which is a spectacular thing in the outdoor pool. But it is amazing because I actually went to the 1982 Commonwealth Games as an 11-year-old girl. We went to most of the events with my grandparents, and I absolutely loved it. And it was there that my interest in sport was definitely sparked as a participant and as a spectator. And it's just an example of the sort of legacy events can leave for a region and a city and a state. It's a real gift of legacy. Last week, it was actually down in Newcastle, but I met a young woman, and she was actually an Uber driver as another job she had, in addition to the day job. But she was living alone and lonely when she first arrived in Newcastle. She was telling me she'd moved interstate. But someone in the workplace has suggested joining the local rugby league women's team, because she absolutely loved rugby league. She actually came from Queensland first up. And so she did. She'd never played before, but she was telling me how she'd become really settled in the city really quickly, settled in her workplace as a result of that connection to the workplace friend who'd suggested it, developed a focus and an energy and a confidence through that community sport. At the local footy clubs on weekends, and it doesn't matter what code, I think the impact's the same. We see young boys and girls, families, refs, volunteers, all gathering, not just for the game, but also to watch the seniors play later, the older siblings play another game, supporting fundraisers and local charities. They're cooking barbecues, they're coordinating jersey rosters, and they're finding sponsors. This gives hope and joy to some participants and their families in what is a tough week and a tough life. Our 4 kids participated in about, I would say collectively over the years, about 20 different sports, both through clubs and schools. And these experiences have certainly shaped us all, not just our kids. There's been impact upon our kids, obviously, through the learning of commitment, values of resilience, leadership, strategy, teamwork, fairness and unfairness as well. But there's also been the vicarious impact upon our whole family, upon bystanders, upon the broader community of our kids' participation along the way, new friendships that have endured, the reward of active fundraising and volunteering, the role modelling for younger siblings of watching their older siblings enjoy sport. And we just talked to the War brothers or the Campbell sisters about that. Learning to welcome new people to the community as well, and understanding new cultures. So that person-to-person connection is forming the fabric in these local communities through sport and through that shared ritual and experience. From the age of 4, Cameron Smith, Dave and Juanita, I can see you in the audience, I'm sure there's a lot of other leaguey supporters out there, accompanied his dad, a rugby league coach throughout his young life, Cam's life, I should say, to training, games and the rooms afterwards, where he comments now on observing and absorbing the culture of the game, the culture of the teams he witnessed, and he credits that experience with shaping his character and his career. I think these stories capture the essence of sport in our communities and our lives. The essence is not just the stadium, field or pool. It's the intangibles, the often unseen, the felt, the remembered, the enduring. Feelings of belonging, self-esteem, achievement, skill building through hard work. Ash Barty, Cassie Freeman, Peter Norman, LeBron James, Colin Kaepernick, Patrick Johnson, Maddie Di Rosario, Kurt Fernley, Jonathan Thurston, Logan Martin, John Bertram, Sam Kerr, Billie Jean King, Adam Goods, Belinda Clark, Laura Geitz, Roger Federer, Paddy Mills, Muhammad Ali, Rachel Watson, Dylan Alcott. Household names we all know. These people embody the essence of sport. It's more than sport. It's action beyond sport. So when a road is upgraded in response to a large number of fatalities and accidents, the budgetary costing assigned to the upgrade costs is just that. What does it cost to upgrade the road? It doesn't account necessarily for the savings and cost savings generated from saving of the lives, the cost of the hospitalisations, the trauma, the rehabilitation, the cost of grief and surgeries. Likewise, when sport and community sporting infrastructure is on the table for funding, it's assigned usually a budget for the cost of building it. It omits these intangibles I'm talking about, the essence of sport, the unseen work of community sport, and it's underestimated in its impact. And I think I'm preaching to the converted in this room. So there's one thing I want to leave you with today, a single takeaway, and it's that sport is not just sport. Sport is a cultural magnet that resonates for all. It enables social and economic impacts well beyond the field. It's a low-cost, flexible, high-impact tool that reaches all. It has a lot of trust and it has the appeal to do so. So by determining sports funding by numbers in participation and the cost of the infrastructure, we are severely underestimating and undervaluing the power of sport. So we need to shift this entire mindset, absolutely, whether it's government, community, the sports organisations and the participants across the whole ecosystem. We need to shift that mindset and understand that sport is a sector, it is a whole industry. And when we look at this week, all the records being broken with the Matildas on Monday night, who didn't watch it? And you won't put your hand up because you're not a good Australian if you didn't. But, 6.54 combined million Australians turned into that on a Monday night. And free-to-air peaked at 3.56 million. And that's just Matilda's Denmark game, a preliminary qualifier. 76,000 people went out to the Sydney Stadium in the outskirts of Sydney on a Monday night. Extraordinary records have been broken there. That's the highest ratings of any content in this country in history. So it's very exciting to see that. The girls, the Matildas, have eclipsed in the first week of the Women's World Cup the sales of jerseys to the Socceroos in the first week, that is. So the reach and ratings have eclipsed, as I said, history. And associated with the main event, of course, there's been a lot of satellite events. There's been events and forums celebrating women's sport, gender equality, sports diplomacy through sport and football. We've seen most teams participating ever in the Women's World Cup history here in our home Women's World Cup. The Matildas embody brand Australia. They're smashing gendered stereotypes and inspiring young girls and boys to participate in this world sport. And it's had a category effect, and we know this already from some of the data coming through. It's had a category effect upon women's sports participation and inclusion messages for sport more broadly. Sporting events like the FIFA Women's World Cup, the Olympics and Paralympics are regarded as movements because they're catalysts for social, economic and sustainable change. They galvanise long-term vision across government, private sector and community to realise enduring intergenerational legacy for our city, our region, our country, and if we do it really well, the world. It's important to remember that these mega events are hosted in local communities from where our talent is founded and nurtured and from where our volunteers are recruited. So while few do end up on the podium, many participate in community sports, and the evidence for this is overwhelming. Phil Knight, the founder of Nike, as many of you would know, actually named the Nike company when it first launched in 1964, Blue Ribbon Sports. Trivia question in case you didn't already know that. And the main reason was that he wanted to pay tribute to grassroots sport, which he recalled as earning the ribbons in the local running races, and it really was his pathway from those days to being a track athlete at the University of Oregon, and the rest, of course, is history. So it does turn out that investing in grassroots sports, by doing so, we're investing in tomorrow's leaders. A survey of 500 Fortune executives globally found that 80% participated in sports. And a more recent survey of 821 C-suite executives found that a whopping 90% of women sampled played sports. Among women currently holding C-suite positions, this proportion actually rose to 97%. So many successful individuals credit sports for playing a key role in shaping their character, resilience, grit and work ethic. I know Serena Williams is on the record of crediting the valuable lessons of mental toughness and focus through tennis upon her success on and off the field. Likewise, Sir Richard Branson, founder of the Virgin Group, credits his business success for his passion for adventure sports, including skills of risk-taking and resilience. Oprah Winfrey is another one who speaks on the record about her participation in sports like track and field and being instrumental to her success through lessons of self-determination and discipline. So with sport as a known predictor of confidence, engagement and success in education, mental and physical health and connection, it follows that it should be accessible for all. While sport is becoming more and more accessible, there remain significant barriers to participation for some groups, including people from regional and remote areas, First Nations peoples, low socioeconomic individuals, LGBTQTA+ community people, people from culturally diverse backgrounds, and people with a disability. So policy is needed to ensure that sporting infrastructure and green space are accessible for all, despite urban creep and rising financial barriers associated with organised sports and talent pathways. People need to be encouraged, recognised and rewarded for volunteer training and deployment in community sport, and influences of participation need to be targeted, including parents, older siblings, teachers, elite athletes and teams. Collaboration is needed across the ecosystem to promote innovation and a systematic culture of having a go, belonging and sportsmanship, rather than winning toxic sidelines and abuse. The trust in sport needs to be guarded through gold standard governance, despite reliance on volunteers, by assurance of education and training and grassroots audits. Critically, funding from any source has to be premised upon a firm business case that captures the full ambit of this social and economic impact of sport, and that accounts for the social cohesion, the performance in education, engagement in education, mental and physical health, community spirit and optimism, engaging with disenfranchised youth, and mentoring our future leaders. The sports, you know all these stats, I know, and they differ around, but it's about 250,000 people work in the sports sector directly, representing almost 2% of the Australian workforce. A further 1.8 million committed volunteers donate 158 million hours to sport each year. The multi-billion-dollar sports tech industry is also part of the sports sector and can serve as a really useful and accessible beta testing ground for allied health technology, for example, and valuable global exports. The contribution to our national health and well-being is an economic and social contribution by sport in the billions, and sport tourism is a large and growing slice of our tourism economy. And Benny, I see you there in the room. You know this very well from the Gold Coast Marathon, for instance, and the Masters Games. Beyond this economic impact, the contribution by sport to many of the 17 UN Sustainability Development Goals is also significant. The funny thing is, sport is not named in any of those 17 goals, which I know you guys would probably agree I find absolutely extraordinary. However, the UN General Assembly has recognised the direct contribution of sport to most of those goals, and specifically about 8 of them. Sport has proven to be that cost-effective, flexible tool for promoting peace and development objectives, an enabler of sustainable development, like women's empowerment, sustainability as well, and action for climate change, addressing that crisis, particularly in some of the poorest nations of the world, access to education and community health, and of course building community cohesion, which I've already mentioned. So I'll run through a bit of the how, like how have we seen this happen? And personally, I've seen it in the slums of Africa and India, where I've certainly been and worked. I've witnessed the amazing joy you see some of those kids when they're just kicking a soccer ball around and bowling a few in an alley, you know, the slums of India, Kenya. Absolutely extraordinary, the joy, just not organised sport, informal sport, social sport brings for them. At the Brisbane Lions, we have a partnership with Multicultural Australia, and one of the things I witnessed recently was a tremendous welcome to country at Brighton Homes Arena out at Springfield, and following that by our local Indigenous leaders. But following that, we had 10 refugees recently settled to the area get up and say the same welcome to country in 10 of their own languages, which really speaks volumes around what can happen in sport and in its infrastructure. It's more than a field, it's more than a stadium. The NBA Cares program, many of you might have heard about, they've managed to engage with 18 million youths annually through their program of youth serving on youth-focused programs supporting education, youth and family development. The grassroots soccer program across Africa addressing health issues like HIV and AIDS and other health to make sure there's informed decisions around community leaders through soccer. The Magic Bus in India is extraordinary. It uses sports and games to engage children and young adults from marginalised communities, and they focus on life skills development, gender equality and education through that program. Box Girls is another one, founded in Kenya and now operating globally, that uses boxing as a platform to empower girls and young women. It builds self-confidence, leadership and defence skills. Back home here in Australia, we've got Surf Lifesaving Australia's Beach Safe program as a great example of enabling some of the cultures, new cultures to Australia as well, and linguistically diverse people learn how to swim and surf safety. The Sporting Wheelies is another terrific grassroots organisation that creates opportunities for people with disability to lead healthy and, most importantly, social lives, socially connected to their communities. And it's one out of 5 of us in Australia who need that sort of access. And I know I'm looking forward to hearing from Katie around more on this and how she's managed to get through to elite sport in what she does. Huge fan. White Cloud Sports, I just met with today, Adam Scott, a professor here at QUT actually, partnering with Queensland sports clubs across the state to provide free mental health experts to those affiliated with those clubs, including not just the athletes, but also the volunteers, the coaches, and the members of those clubs. An extraordinary program, that one, if you're not already onto it. So many of these initiatives align directly to those UN Sustainability Development Goals, ones like Goal 5 on gender equality, ones like Goal 3 on ensuring healthy lives and promoting well-being for all ages. There's others around promoting peace and particularly in these types of times in war-torn areas, sport is the connector. Back in 1914, I think it was, there was an amnesty during the war where the soldiers played, now what was the sport? Was it rugby union? Soccer? It was soccer. I'm sorry to get that wrong at this time, but it was soccer. I thought it was rugby union, I can't remember. But and they downed that to play sport. So sport brought together the truce. And of course, we have the Olympic truce very well acknowledged by the UN for many years since those sorts of initiatives. So sport can eliminate gender stereotypes, as I've said, through women's sport. And as we're seeing up close right now with the power of this Women's World Cup, it's extraordinary to have and to see the effect on the whole nation. And another example of that, certainly that many of us have seen, is the Angel City Football Club that was launched in LA just recently by a host of celebrities. Everyone's nodding on that one. It's an extraordinary disruptive model to grassroots sport and elite sport as well, the way these women have gone about it. They are female celebrities and venture capitalists who have funded this. They give back 10% of everything they earn to the community, to a range of programs, and they fill those stadiums every single weekend. And this is in the wake of the women's team of LA going broke back in 2010. There hasn't been one since, and they've managed to launch it, and not just launch it, it's a global success. Their model, the way they're doing things. So it's an example of innovation in sport, as well as just the power of some of the rise of women's sports and what it can do to resonate with audiences, aligning with Goal 5, as I said. Another point, I hope I'm not going too over time, Tim, is that half the world's population is under 25. So what we've found through a lot of research from the World Economic Forum, from a paper, a huge survey of 10,000 youth across 12 countries published in The Lancet, that they have found that age 16 to 25, that 56% of young people feel that humanity is doomed and they personally have no future, and 2/3 feel anxious, hopeless, and afraid for the future. So this trend is obviously concerning, but it's such an opportunity to really turn to youth and engage with them closely as part of our legacy for 2032 and beyond. We can ensure meaningful and measurable participation of youth in the planning of legacy and addressing the barriers to youth advocacy and engagement. And it starts in grassroots sport across the state. So it's really good to see the IOC's and the IPC's willingness to embrace new sports that resonate with these next generations, sports like skateboarding and breakdancing, esports, of course, as well, is seen as a medalled event in the Asian Games. Some of these sports, esports being one example, are incredibly inclusive. We can have mixed genders playing this, mixed abilities, neurally diverse kids, and there's also links back to STEM education, creative industries through esports. So I think that's a really interesting story. And it doesn't mean that signing up to virtual sports is the end of traditional sports. And in fact, there's many models now where we're seeing that there's a wonderful linkage between them. And in fact, some of those platforms that are growing for under 12s, things like Roblox, are actually incentivizing kids through gaming to engage in activity through things like Nightland, and then being rewarded online by their activity outside and on basketball courts and all the rest. So I think there's some tremendous space for innovation in our sector. So a skateboard park is not just an infrastructural cost. It is preventative health, it's social connection, it's engaging our youth, and it's even educational. There's many programs in America, Afghanistan as well, actually, bringing classes into skateboard parks to learn STEM skills, things like physics, for instance, and analytics. In a recent study in California, they've found that skateboard diplomacy is a really powerful tool across the states, particularly to engage low socioeconomic areas, disengaged cultures, linguistically diverse youth as well, and even used as a platform to prevent youth crime and engage them better in education. So a great story there. So, and a footy club can obviously be a place, as I said, to integrate refugee citizens or lonely youth and ageing residents. It's a multi-purpose heart in the suburb that can fundraise for community causes, connect, educate and promote health and well-being. It can be an engaging vehicle to relay messaging about anti-violence, anti-drugs and respect for all. It can be a centre to redeploy a tight community around sport as a mud army to clean up a flood-stricken city, as we've all experienced, and initiate a meal roster for a grieving family. So I'm really optimistic about the green and gold decade ahead and beyond, because I think we can realise benefits for all through sport. Just like sport, 2032 is about uncovering potential. And in the mission of the UN Sustainability Development Goals, we won't leave anyone behind. At the recent 9 Years to Go celebration in my neighbourhood of Wynnum Manly, I went down and to the emblems that were being unveiled, and I met so many interesting people. One was a local family, and they came out decked out completely in the green and gold rig. And the mother advised me that her 10-year-old son, after introducing him, was going to definitely be on the podium for 2032 for fencing. And her 8-year-old daughter was definitely going to be on the podium for archery, and that she would be a volunteer. And they were so excited to see those emblems unveiled down at the Bayside. And then during that morning, also witnessed a teen skateboarder who wanted a photo with the emblems because he was heading to the podium, a group of mountain bike riders, runners, and a team of kids who sort of jumped out of a bus and they're on the way to a hockey game and all came over for the photos as well. So, if we remove our community sport, we take away that dream for our kids. Community sport is the pathway to elite sports and is so unique to Australia. A gold medal for the kid aiming for the fencing or the little girl aiming for the archery is a gold medal for the 5 club presidents, the multiple coaches, their parents, their entire community. It's not just for that kid. So in the US, it's actually only varsity sports out of high school and they're elite. So our club system here is unique. The volunteer system underpinning Australian and Queensland sport is unique. And so it's an outlet, as I said, for social connection, health and enjoyment. And that's the power of sport. So I'm looking forward to this discussion soon, Tim. Hope I haven't gone to overtime, but thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you. You did it. You're through the other side. Thank you very much for going first. I appreciate that very much. I want to introduce the other 3 panellists that are on stage here with Sarah. The thing to say up front is that I've read through these bios a couple of times, at least, for each of the 3 people here next to Sarah, and I get such a kick out of just reading their bios. I wait till you hear this. Sincerely, a very heartfelt thank you to you, Sarah, for unpacking a range of things that provide such a jumping off point for a conversation now about this idea of sport having its power, but I love this idea of cultural magnetism. I love the idea of it being a connector. It's a bridge across the things that traditionally we know tend to be sources of division in our community. So allow me now to introduce the 3 other people that are joining us here on stage. Maia Davidson is immediately to Sarah's right, is of Ngāti Rokoa and Ngāti Kahu descent and originally hails from a sheep and beef farm outside of a small rural town called Ekatahuna in Aotearoa, New Zealand. She's a former New Zealand Rugby League representative and a qualified health and physical education teacher. Maia is the National Manager of Welcoming Clubs at Welcoming Australia, collaborating with sports organisations, councils and clubs to promote diversity and inclusion, ensuring our codes and clubs reflect the communities they aim to serve and support. Maia is also a member of the Project Steering Group, currently driving and guiding the development of the Australian Sports Commission's new National Sport Participation Strategy. Maia coaches the mighty South Logan Magpies in the Queensland Premiership Rugby League competition and is assistant coach of the Queensland Origins Under-19s Rugby League team. Maia has played and coached rugby union globally in countries including Canada, Spain and England, and contributed to sport for social development projects in Kenya, Uganda and Laos. She also contributes to 2 sport committees, the Taiwhanaki Youth Academy, which blends rugby sevens and cultural performing arts, and the Pacific Empowerment Group of Australia, PEGA, organisers of the Queensland Pacific Island Cultural Carnival of Rugby League, which is now in its 10th year. Maia acknowledges sport, this is my favourite bit, Maia acknowledges sport as having paved so many paths throughout her life, providing the greatest gifts in friends and experiences. Maia is passionate about sharing the opportunities she was privileged to receive and believes, romantically, as many of us in the room will, that sport can solve all the world's problems and should be accessible to everyone regardless of their background and or ability. Maia, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Immediately next to Maia is Nathan Upper, who's a proud Mamu man from Innisfail with correction to Goreng and Bundjalung nations. Nathan worked with First Contact Youth Corporation for 8 years, supporting a touch football programs and the Sport and Cultural Festival at Whites Hill, and he's now the manager of the business development team for Deadly Choices at the Institute for Urban Indigenous Health. He works closely with a range of elite and community sporting codes, clubs and organisations, including our NRL and NRLW teams, the Lions, Netball Queensland and the Firebirds, the AOC. He's very passionate about Indigenous men's mental health as well, and is a leading and very visible Movember Australian ambassador. He also sits on the Movember International Members Board, where he advocates for Indigenous men's health on a global scale. Nathan is a committee member for Reconciliation Queensland and has recently been appointed to the National Referendum Engagement Group. Welcome. And on the end of the line here, Katie Kelly OAM PLY is a disability and inclusion advocate and a two-time Paralympian, Rio and in Tokyo. She was the first Australian to win the gold medal in ParaTriathlon when the sport debuted at the Rio 2016 Paralympics. Katie also won 2 World Championships on either side of Rio in 2015 and 2017 and retired after the Tokyo Paralympic Games. In 2017, Katie established the Sport Access Foundation, a registered charity providing grants for young Australians living with a disability to improve their access to sport. The foundation has provided over $80,000 in grants reaching over 500 children across Australia. Katie is a non-executive director for Achieve Australia, an industry fellow with Griffith University's Disability Inclusive Council, a co-patron of the Australian Deaf Games, and is an ambassador for the Australian Sporting Alliance for People with a Disability. Katie works in the midst of all of that as the Disability Experience Manager for MEGT, a not-for-profit providing apprenticeship and employment services. Katie's journey of living with Usher syndrome is one of tenacity and of grit. Her insights of disability in today's world challenge us to question what we think we know about disability and to encourage all of us to be better. Katie, welcome. Thank you so much for being here as well. What I want to do is start initially to kind of give you guys a chance to springboard off what you've heard and what Sarah's covered there. So Maia, I'm going to ask you to go first. Sure. Your initial reflections, was there a key theme, a key concept, a key idea that really resonated with you in what Sarah was talking about, and why was that?
Hi everybody. Thank you for having me tonight. There was so much in that and everything that Sarah said, but I think at the moment working on the National Sports Participation Strategy, I think what we're seeing and what I think is probably reflective of the people that we have in the room and everything that Sarah is saying, and the World Cup being on and the Olympics coming, is everybody understands the opportunity that we have in front of ourselves right now. We talk a lot within that project steering group about the power of sport in terms of what sport can do for the greater good, but what sport can do in its own right as well. And I think that's really important that we consider those two things. But I think it's just a really exciting time, to be perfectly honest. Like, I'm really excited to be in sport and around sport and involved in sport right now in Australia, of all places, for myself, which is probably not something that I would have said growing up, that I'm excited to be in Australian sport. But I just think it's so exciting right now, and the opportunity, if everybody's on the same level about what we can achieve, I just think it's going to be amazing. I'm really looking forward to the next 10 years. Yeah,
I'm with you 100% in terms of, more than 100% in terms of that sense of this moment. I think, Sarah, you talk about Brisbane 82, I think about Sydney 2000, Gold Coast 2018, across these generations, the impact that moment has, and I think we're part of this time where we're engineering minute by minute, day by day, what 2032 will provide in a way that those other moments have provided for our generation and those that have come before us. Nathan, your key reflection, any key takeaway, something that really landed with you?
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge traditional owners of the land that we gather on today, pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the room also. I really should have added a few more things in that bio, listen to everyone else's bio then. But yeah, I think for myself and our community, and it's such an exciting time. I think, you know, you captured that beautifully in the oration. I had to Google that as well, ask a few people. I think it's just such an exciting time to be a part of the Olympic sport, being here in Brisbane as well. And I think there's going to be so many opportunities. I look at it as a cultural lens of everything we do within sport, within health, hospitality, everything, and how the Olympics and sport is going to impact our people in a good way. You know, what's the legacy piece of how is it going to make our people healthier? How are we going to get more of our young people who are in, you know, primary school, high school now, how are we going to get them working at the Olympics as well? I talked to Ricky Dodd there just before about, you know, they're the ones we're going to be wanting to, you know, project manage, be volunteers, not necessarily always competing in there, but also supporting and you know, contributing to the Olympics in this world stage event, and what that's going to mean for our community as well. How that's going to empower our young women to continue playing sport or want to play sport, especially with the Matildas at the moment, and break down a lot of those barriers that our people are facing now. How can we do that on a grassroots level, at a community level, that our people are facing daily in sport as well? So, you know, I love to be optimistic about what's coming, but we've got to be also, you know, understand that there's really strong barriers for our people to play sport, engage in sport, and also how we're going to connect that to a health initiative as well.
Yeah, and I take Sarah's point about, you know, this apparent causal link between the formative experiences that sport provides and moving on to be leader in corporate and community spheres. And so, if for no other reason, the call to action to what you're talking about there is that it helps generate the leaders of our future across community and corporate layers. Yeah, absolutely. Katie, welcome. Thank you. Talk to us about what landed for you in what Sarah talked about tonight and why.
Thank you. Sorry for my croaky voice, but I feel fine. I come to you from the Yugambeh land, so the beautiful Gold Coast. It's wonderful to be here tonight. And in the spirit of inclusion, I'd like to describe my appearance for low vision people in the audience. And it's a great practice to bring into your events. So I'm a middle-aged woman wearing a green dress, and I have a guide dog sitting by my side, Guthrie. Just on Guthrie, Sarah, when you talked about the Chandler Aquatic Centre and the diversity of it, I take Guthrie with me to the Miami Aquatic Centre, and one day I turned my back to him and the lifeguard came up and said, "Oh, Katie, your guide dog's jumped in the in lane 1." So he fully behind 2032 campaigns for doggy races. But Sarah's message, and I think my key takeaway, the power of the Paralympics and the Olympics, I think sport has always been really good in setting benchmarks and creating visible role models. So as a person with a disability growing up, the only person I knew in town that wore hearing aids like myself was an old retiree. Otherwise, people in the community that had disability weren't really visible. So growing up, I looked for those role models, and I did find them in Deaf Sports Australia, and eventually I went to the Deaf Olympics as a media officer later in life. So what I sort of what Sarah was saying was the power of sport to for all of us to be better in how we deliver our services, in how we bring everybody in the community involved. And I think about the aspect of role models, the programs that we implement. I've just lost my thought there, but essentially creating sport and the preparation for the games is a really great opportunity to challenge ourselves to be better.
Absolutely. Sarah, I want to come back to the examples that you provided in what you talked about. Are there core ingredients that underpin the impact that all of those examples, both domestically, internationally, across all the different dimensions of sport, are there key things we have to get right in order for sport to be what it can be, to actualise its potential, to have the impact that we know, as you've described, it can have?
You mean through some of the programs that I was giving examples around and how they,
Yeah, thinking about what are the,
scale the impact.
What's the common thread through all of those things that you think about being essentially the determinant of the success of the impact?
Look, I think the first one with a program around, and you'd be able to speak, all of you would know more than I would, and so I'm in very good company on it, but just my initial take would be, starting something really authentically and locally that's community-led, around, that is relevant for that sport, I think becomes quite interesting. I know Taekwondo, I've met in the room tonight, and that we were talking about that, they're global, and we're not allowed to call it a federation, which is really a funny story, WTF, just, but they actually formed a foundation that was around humanitarian causes around refugees, because they found a lot of refugees engaged in Taekwondo. So they've engaged youth refugees and elevated their plight to the world through that foundation. So, that's a great example of something starting very local and relevant to that sport, but scaling up. And I think on the scaling bit, technology is so accessible now, it's cheap, everyone can access it. So it's thinking collaboratively and also leveraging the power of augmentation through technology to maybe get a pilot going and then thinking, oh, this is working in rugby league or whatever it might be, like White Cloud I mentioned has done. And now he's got a whole lot of Queensland sports signed up because it's working. Volunteer psychologists signing up for this telehealth, it's unbelievable. And so there's ways to scale things, I think, even globally. And the skateboarding was a great example. That came out of Afghanistan and now it's global. The girl boxing is another one. So I hope that answers the question, but I know these guys would know better answers there.
And I'm going to come to the three of you. Something that stands out is what you're talking about there in terms of the digital participation that we ideally need to see to underpin that reach, and some fabulous research that Aussie Post did back in 2016-17. And one of the most digitally literate communities are the homeless, because it's how they find their next meal, their next bed. And so thinking differently about where technology is currently being used to get jobs done that are fundamentally about addressing the kind of the bottom of Maslow's pyramid, right? And so we can build on thinking differently about the use and application of technology in that regard. Maia, building on what Sarah's talking about there, how do we think in a more expansive way about bringing underrepresented groups, the voices we don't traditionally hear, into the programs? We can build the program. How do we do that in a way that includes the voices of people we're building it for?
I think in the experiences I've had with welcoming clubs, and it does touch on what Sarah is saying, is the people closest to the problems are the people closest to the solutions. And I think there's a tendency, when you're sitting in an office and there's a problem, you solve the problem from the office. So I think what we've seen over time, which is wonderful, is that there's more trust in community-led responses. I think that's growing. I think in Victoria, where we do a lot of our work, particularly the horrible time they had with COVID, they didn't actually try and solve all the problems themselves. They actually trusted the community, and they trusted the organisations that the community trusted to work on those solutions. I won't say solve the solutions or the issues, but they trusted other people to do it because they knew that they were closer to it and they had a better understanding, and they were also representative of the community. So I think if we want to bring those people in, we have to go and find them and trust them first, and trust that they know what they're doing. And I think we talk a lot in terms of community organisations around mentoring up. So instead of me going to a big organisation to learn from them, the people in the offices with the decision-making capacity and the money, that they need to go down to the ground and work with those organisations to learn and be mentored by those people.
Yep. Nathan, can I give you the opportunity to build on that?
Yeah, echoing those words, I think, organisations on a high level, corporates are always looking to say, well, we can just give you money and that'll solve it. No, it's, you can show us an in-kind support, bring us along, put us at, get us to the boardroom tables, get us to, be involved in decision making when it comes to our people, because we know that, when we look at a cultural lens, we understand that we know the solutions, just like you said. I just seen Dave Maiden here, and a great program we ran years ago was the Under-16 Rugby League men's young boys program. That was a culturally appropriate program that was aimed at young men that, you know, were disengaged playing rugby league, but we saw there was a dropout around the under-16 year age group. So we were able to create a culturally appropriate rugby league program that engaged young men from around the state and actually got them to play on the big stage for one game of the year, sometimes twice, before the Anzac Test, and they got to play before now the Indigenous All-Stars at the moment. Now we're able to see these young men go across as a kickstart, a bit of a booster to go and play in the NRL. They got contracts, they were in the system, they weren't disengaged around that time, and we've seen some amazing successes from that. Young men going in and representing on the Australian level into the Queensland level, into State of Origin, into the Australian level as well. So, you know, I think when you bring Indigenous people a part of the conversation, when we're part of the creation of programs, and when you bring an Indigenous lens to issues, especially when you want to target our people, when we're a part of the conversation, you're going to see bigger and better benefits for the long term.
Yep, absolutely. Katie, I want to give you the opportunity to build on this too. I think about, you know, 1 in 5 Australians as an audience is a significant number of people, but within that is a really rich, diverse combination of requirements, of opportunities, of solutions. Thinking about the work you do day in and day out, what's the right way to start? Where do we begin to think about moving from kind of barrier-centric thinking to opportunity or solution thinking centric?
I always just think about, I talk about saying going to Miami Aquatic Centre, and it is diverse, but there's a lot of white Caucasian people there. So it's sort of been very mindful of the seat of privilege that we all sit and who's not there. Sport Access Foundation, so we give out grants every year for kids with disability, and there are so many barriers for their participation. And Sarah talked about the intersectionalities of people who have challenges accessing sport, low socio-economic, etc. And for us, you can imagine if you're a single mum and you've got a couple of kids and they're on the neurodiverse, etc., trying to get them access to sport, the amount of phone calls that takes to ring a club, etc. So there's so much work that needs to be done in supporting our clubs and our volunteers. And I know, like, Dylan Alcott Foundation got a grant called Sport for All. I think it's like a $4 million grant to link up councils with their clubs to educate clubs and councils how to be more inclusive. But if I can give a really practical example of the challenges, a young fella named Jack, not his real name, from Tasmania, is about 13, and we wanted Jack to come to Centennial Park in Sydney to test out this new accessible athletic track that we're building. It's an amazing project. Jack needs 24/7 care. He's in a motorised chair. When I spoke to Jack, he, you know, on text, he was super excited. When I spoke to his support worker, they said, "Are you sure about this?" I said, "Why?" And they said, "Well, 2 of us have got to come. He's got specialised equipment that he needs." And I said, "Absolutely." And we talk about 1 in 5 have a disability. Jack has really enormous challenges. And so I'm very aware that I look very able-bodied, right? And I'm very privileged in everything that I have. And there's a great bloke named Professor Sean Tweedy that I'm sure you all know. And his philosophy is, how do we ensure sport is available and there's a high performance pathway for our most challenged people in the disability community? Because I think that's a cohort that's getting left behind. But anyway, with Jack, those sorts of conversations where the support worker says, "Can you afford this?" You know, that's what I call a disableist attitude, because it's about, well, do you really, you know, the support worker was probably being realistic, but it's also about change your mindset, let's make this happen. Let's all go that extra step to ensure that people like Jack have every opportunity to come and test out this new product, right? Because sometimes we go, it's too hard. And I catch myself with that with my work. We employed a person with no vision, and there was really a few challenges with that. So eventually we did get Jack there. On his way home, there was an incident with a taxi driver in Sydney, and he was really upset, and he texted us. I know what that's like. I get knocked back by an Uber once a week. They drive away. They don't want to take myself with a guide dog. It's a real problem in the rideshare industry. So not only is Jack just trying to get to Centennial Park with his mates to test out this lane and get there and get home, he has this encounter with this taxi driver, and it's so upsetting. So there's a lot of great stuff that's happening, but again, I go back to, we're also, we've all got experiences with disability. 1 in 5 and 1 in 9 of us are carers. By the age of 65, half of us will have a disability. So it's in all of us, and we really just have to keep coming back to who in our community is not here, and think about that Jack next time you go to organise an event. How could a Jack participate? I probably went a bit off course there.
No, thank you. Because I think that the illustrative power of story, I think, brings that to life really beautifully. Sarah, you talked about the FIFA Women's World Cup. We'd be a bit remiss if we didn't touch on that briefly here, given the moment that's unfolding in front of us, not just from a gender equity point of view, but I think in terms of this sense of sport acting as that great magnet that you talked about. How do we find a way to harness the calculus that underpins that so that we don't have to wait for the next mega event to produce the same kinds of interest, investment, broadcast ratings? I mean, it's quite extraordinary what's happening, the step change that's being triggered or catalysed by the World Cup. But what we want to do is see it continue a week, 1 month, 1 quarter, 1 year later. And also, we don't want to have to wait for the Lions Tour, the 27 and 29 Rugby World Cups for men and women. How do we not wait for those moments? How do we get on with that now?
Yeah, look, it's a big question, but I think it comes down to legacy and legacy planning as we're going through now with the 2032 opportunity. The earlier you start, the better. Not just planning, but implementing and the measurement too. So how are we measuring the dial moving around diversity and inclusion pre and post Women's World Cup, for instance? So we know we're underperforming as an OECD developed nation in gender equity in this nation. We're nowhere near it. So I know there's a lot of celebration. We have moved a lot over the last, 40 years, but not far enough. So there's a lot of work to be done. But this zeitgeist right now is a moment for our nation to really examine where the metrics are and have a really longitudinal view, thinking, well, where do we want to be in 32 on that? Where do we want to be in, First Nations recognition and embeddedness in all of our culture, in everything we do, including sport? So there's a whole lot of questions there, and it comes down to what we're measuring, and measuring in a really sophisticated, multidimensional, longitudinal way, which is what I was saying. It's not just sport we're measuring here. This is so much more. And I think when we look at some of those events, the heads of states that arrived in town here quite extraordinarily the other week around some of the events around gender equity and sustainability development goal discussions, that's a testament around trade and diplomacy. What can we do around brand Australia in this area? And it's the walk we've got to walk the talk, basically, and make sure that we capitalise on this moment. And it is a moment. It's a moment in our history. We've got to draw that line, and we are all about diversity and inclusion and not leaving anyone behind, and making sure that person is in the room, Katie. Absolutely. I'm fired up now.
Yeah, that's all right. I've just got questions. I've got thousands of questions I want to ask, but I want to give the audience an opportunity to ask questions. There are 2 roving mics floating around here. We'd like you to use those, please, so we capture your question on camera. If you have a question, Kylie's going to run a microphone to you. Please put your hand up. We'll give you the opportunity to ask that question and direct it to whichever of the people up here on stage that you'd like to. Fiona, thank you. Down the front here, please, Kylie. Oh, no, sorry, make you come all the way.
Thank you. I guess my question is really around about, having worked in diversity and inclusion, it's around about how you deal with pushback. So whilst everything's very exciting at the moment, it'll be interesting to see what happens, or if it happens, but if there is a loss, how is the media going to react to that? We saw the way that Megan was vilified with the US, and we've seen it in different sports, how that happens and how we lose our momentum. So how do we plan for that so that that doesn't happen? We don't lose that momentum.
Sure. We do cultural competence for community sports clubs, and we have a whole section called Pushing Back on Pushback. And really that's around supporting clubs when they get pushed back because they're trying to do this stuff that's different for the people that are there for the very first time. And I think what we always try and encourage, and I think it's relevant, is like the people with the good things to say, they have to control the narrative, and that has to start now, before the game. And I think potentially the examples that we have seen from the US is an example of how not to do it. And I think I would hope, and again it's a little bit romantic to assume that, I would hope the experience that Australia has had with this World Cup will be enough for the media to pick a positive narrative and go with that, because they've already overachieved. They've already outdone the expectations of well, I didn't know anything about football, but I knew that they weren't meant to get this far, apparently. So I think we do say that it's about controlling the narrative and identifying the early resistors. So who are the media outlets that are going to come out and be negative, and making sure that you can counter that right from the front foot. In my community, in sport and just in community in general, if you're not getting pushback, you're probably not doing a good job anyway. So, yeah, you expect that pushback, and I think it's a good indicator of, you're doing a good job, and you're rattling a few feathers, and you're going to have to overcome it as a unit. I think it probably gives it a good opportunity to showcase the great work in other areas as well, in women's sport, especially soccer as well. And then, I probably, like you said, probably America hasn't done it so great, and it gives us a good opportunity to sit back and see who is, the media outlets who are pushing back onto the sport, and it's a great indicator of, where we probably should be. Like you said, we're probably not great in the world, on the world stage, but it gives us a great indicator of where we need to be. And I don't think pushback is necessarily a bad thing. It's I guess it's a great way to give us an opportunity to see where we can build as well. Yeah.
I was just going to add, the power of social media. I know it's a dark force as well, but during this Women's World Cup, I've taken a lot of optimism by a lot of the female commentators, female celebrities, sportswomen, other female professional sports getting around the Matildas and other women in the sport, but calling out inappropriate broadcasting and all the rest. There was one example, one of the earlier games, I think, around one of the Matildas who's a mother as well, and they kept, the male commentator kept referring to that, the fact, for a mother, she's kicking, God, amazing. And so that was called out, and I think that's becoming quite common now. So I think there's a collective zeitgeist around this where we're really seeing the community move, and it's really exciting to see too that the bigger message around diversity and inclusion as well around this. It's not just gender we're talking about here. It's a real beacon.
Yeah, and I know the ABC also engaged some First Nations soccer players here in Australia to start broadcasting some of the games. A good friend of mine, Kirralie Phillips, who is a part of the Koalas as well, the Indigenous soccer team as well, she's been engaged, and how that's been able to empower her love for the game and people around her and young women who are wanting to play the sport, but also potentially be in broadcasting and other avenues for the game. So, it's great that we're having representation on an Indigenous level in the sport as well.
And I think it's the authenticity of the World Cup Women's Games and the programs and initiatives that they put in place. So there was a call out to have, for the very first time, I believe, visible descriptions of the games for volunteers, for people who have no sight. I think about the storytelling around young girls with female role models, and I heard a young girl on the ABC radio today, and she's like, I really think that they need to work on their attack. Their defence is okay, And the reporter was like, oh, that's controversial. But I just feel everything around the World Cup and the soccer players themselves and the way they talk and the way the reporters are interacting with Sam Kerr after the game. It's about the athletes, it's about the performance and the joy that they're bringing. And obviously that's a lot to do with the team culture, etc. But in terms of the organisation of the games, and I've been observing different things they've done in terms of inclusion, I think that people can see that there's a genuine commitment to let's bring everyone along to this wonderful event, and then that just sort of gains momentum. But I will say in terms of pushback, Sarah, there was that initial Queensland government brought everyone together, the first legacy sort of session that they had, and I had to do a little interview on ABC radio, and Guthrie wants a bit more attention. And she said, Katie, oh, was it another one of those wishy-washy sort of, you know, and I thought, geez, it's 9 years out and we haven't even. And I said, no, I think it's a real genuine passion that people want to ensure that these games have real impact for all of us. And so I think it's all around the positivity, right, and keeping that momentum going along.
Time for one more question from the floor, if there is one. Kate and Teal. Yep.
Thanks for that, Kylie. So my question is, are we ready for the surge? Post-Sydney, there was a huge surge. And I remember chatting with some friends at archery one day, and that was just after Hunger Games and Brave came out. And they went from 300 members to 850 members. How do clubs deal with that? How do state sporting organisations deal with that? Post-Sydney, we had the surge, and then it levelled out again, and hopefully that line it levels out to is higher than the original line, right? But are we really ready for that? And are we thinking about that in the legacy planning as well?
It's a small, sort of really reasonably simple question to answer. Anyone want to have a crack at that one first?
It's a great question, and then overlaying that, of course, are all the international sports federations and teams wanting to come here and experience the climate and train and sort of bags the training facilities that they will take over leading into. So it's a really interesting question, but I think it's just that innovation and working in collaboration too, where, you know, can we do things, you know, overnight and get out of the heat during the day and play, you know, I don't know, there's got to be more to this multi-purposing and all the rest, but yeah, it's something that absolutely is on the table that everyone needs to think about. True, because there's already, you know, fully utilisation. You would know the stats on that. Yep. Full utilisation and
sports turning
waitlist
participants away, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
Soccer is. I was talking to one of the soccer guys.
Yep.
He was saying, yeah.
Yep. There's a few sports in that category. Teal, can I give you the chance to ask the last question?
I don't want to be the person that keeps everybody from dinner. Look, it's probably more of a comment. I was at the National Sports Convention. Tim, I know you were there a couple of weeks back, and there were some really interesting things that were raised. There's a physical inactivity pandemic taking place. The mega trends that have come out by Sports Oz is obviously identifying that traditional competitive organised sport is slowly becoming less popular and people are looking for more joy-based activities. Another thing that was raised was that mega events, there's actually no research out there that shows a correlation between a mega event and participation increase. And also that, you know, the elite athletes, people these days don't relate as much to elite athletes, aren't striving to be competitive, the top of the top. So I guess looking at the next 10 years, how do we make sure that we are addressing that physical inactivity pandemic? Maybe it's around the messaging that we have with the games about the social health and other well-being benefits that are delivered by participating in sport other than trying to be number one.
Yeah, I'd love to take this one. No, I think you're smack on right. When I'm thinking about the Olympics and the legacy piece, for me, it's, you know, I love the Olympics, I love sport, but it's how is this Olympics or sport going to benefit my people in some way when it comes to health. So we're rolling the red carpet out for countries to come here. We're throwing all this money to the Olympics to host it here, but we're not going to hit the close the gap targets when it comes to 2031. So our people are still going to be dying younger than everyone else. The only 2 targets have been hit by the close the gap targets. We're not going to hit them. By 2030, we're going to have the largest Indigenous population here in southeast Queensland, which means more overcrowding in houses, access to healthcare. I know that when I first started at the Institute for Urban Indigenous Health 13 years ago, we were only doing about 500 health checks a year with 4 Aboriginal health services. Now we've built 23 health services doing about 22,000 health checks a year, but we're still chasing our tail. For us, it's about using sport as that vehicle to connect our people with sport, whether it's the social health, mental health, getting our people into Aboriginal health services to close the gap, and we've done a really good job there. But we have a barrier in working with sporting organisations to work with us in closing the gap. We just signed Paddy Mills and the Boomers the other day. We've done an amazing campaign with them, taking community members who have had their health check down to Melbourne next week. Some of these community members never been out of their community, never been out of the state, but they get to go down to Melbourne, meet Paddy Mills and the team because of they've had a health check and engage with their community-controlled health service. So there's some really good work there being done, but that's my fear. It's about all this money going to the Olympics, but are we going to be able to close the gap when it comes to our people's health? I know that we'll be part of the opening ceremony, we'll be doing all this, but what's the legacy piece for our people long term as well? So, they're sirens that are going off in our communities. Our people are going to be moved out of out of Brisbane because of the cost of living. It's always my lens of the cultural lens of how these sports are going to impact our people long term. We know that so we have the saying, we know Aboriginal people are good for sport, but is sport good for us? You see Kathy Freeman on the slides, you see Buddy Franklin, Jonathan Thurston, we're the best at all sports, maybe not swimming so much or the winter sports, but we'll get there.
That's just been lack of equity.
Yeah, we don't like the cold, but is sport good for us? Are we getting the benefits for our people? Are we building our skills in the boardroom? Are we getting our skills in the executive levels? So that increase needs to happen so it can filter down for our people. So I don't know if I really answered your question, but they're the targets we're trying to hit with this the Olympics and the growth of sport coming into Brisbane.
And it's a really good question around how do we get our inactive community engaged and those that don't have access. So Sport Access Foundation, there's 4 types of grants, and one is about the Paralympics, but mostly it's about the grassroots. So talking of First Nations, I think the statistic is around 30% of First Nations have a disability. And we found a Senate report some years ago. It was something like $33 spent on Indigenous boys, only $1 was spent on Indigenous girls, so marginalised again, right? But I set up this fun run in casino fun run, that's where I grew up, 10 years ago. And we want to encourage more participation of First Nation community and also help bridge the gap with any racial tension and so on. And there's some real health challenges there. So what we've managed to do also, Eileen Byers, this is what I love about collaboration. She did the Indigenous Marathon Project, so Robert D. Costello. So imagine a girl from a country town of 10,000, First Nation, she's done the New York Marathon. She's our ambassador for the fun run, so she's our person to help us link with the Indigenous community. But also, a fun run's a bit of a white fellas event, right? You know what I mean? It's sort of, how do we engage First Nation people around Korakai, Kyogle to come in and register and enter? So the other bit we've done is tie up with Macquarie University, because got a link with them with the hearing community, and they want to do more tests, audiometry, health checks, right? So we're bringing them in, and we're trying to sort of coordinate this program where we could get health checks done, Eileen Byers and other Indigenous rugby league team to get the local community involved and get their participation in fun run. And then I had an idea, maybe then all the regional country fun runs, you can get a cohort of people that go to the Gold Coast Marathon, and maybe the Gold Coast Marathon can fund that project too. So there's so many great opportunities in how we can engage people who aren't participating to get involved.
Can I just quickly, from the research perspective, the new norm this is, it's the first of its kind in terms of the longitudinal run-up we've got, which everyone knows. So there's no published studies that has that window in terms of the legacy, planning and activation. So we do have a chance to make those connections between the grassroots and the mega events for the first time in history. So that I'm quite excited about the legacy, being a nerd, of the measurement of this, you know, developing really sophisticated, robust, longitudinal measures that have never been published before, you know, and no previous mega events hosting this have baselined a lot of these social impacts in particular. Now's our chance to do that and really measure all these amazing activations we can do as part of Legacy, measure them as part of the event instead of a cross-sectional survey a month after the event, which has been most of the published research.
Yeah, just with the National Sports Participation Strategy Project Steering Group, it's come up a lot around whether high performance needs to stay over there and be high performance. And there's actually separate sectors within sport, high performance is over there, and then there's just a participation stream which is focused on getting people moving, physically literate and all those kinds of things. And I think it's not that easy. You can't just say they're two different things. But I think with the opportunity of these big events is, you know, you can be inspired by Olympic athletes without aspiring to be an Olympic athlete. And I think talking about the data around, you know, people aren't participating in traditional sports clubs like they used to be, but they're doing other things that could link to that. Like bowls is a perfect example. I think 10% of bowls are members, 90% play barefoot bowls. So that's like a great example of, you know, 90% of the people participating in that sport aren't participating in a way that's going to get them to the Olympics. So we've talked a lot around modification, you know, stirring things up so that sport doesn't have to look the same. As a PE teacher, I think the education sector has a lot to do in that space in terms of making sure kids are moving every single day. But I think that there's an enormous opportunity there. And the best thing about the project steering group, and we've got like Tim's counterparts, we've got CEOs, we've got people from all across the sector, but deep within the sector as well. And everybody is on the same page about the fact that things need to change if we want every single person in Australia to be active and connected is really important as well.
We are out of time, and we feel like we've just scratched the surface, right? Like I could really keep talking to you all for a really long time about so many of the things that have come out of some really great questions. Because we do have to wrap things up, the most important thing to do next is to thank each of you for not only what you do and how you do it, but I so appreciate each of you and how you lead and how you show up to this kind of conversation. I want to, on behalf of the audience tonight, thank you very much for being a part of what's such a great conversation that I feel like we could just keep running into the night if we had the opportunity. So please join me in thanking the 4 people that are here with me on the stage. And, sorry, 4 people and Guthrie. Sorry, I don't want to forget our friend on the end. A couple of last things before we give you the opportunity to stay and have a drink and keep talking to each other, but come and talk to these 4 amazing people as well. I want to thank Mel and Madison from Auslan Services here tonight. Thank you very much for the part that you've played in the delivery of tonight's event. Thank you. To the team from the Gardens Theatre, so Alexia, Rachel, James, TU, Anthony, Mick, Abby and Tom, who are doing the very important job of drinks as well for us tonight. Thank you, all of you, for the chance that we've had to work with you tonight. To Tom on the camera, to Dylan and Julian on those cameras over there, thank you very much again. The chance to take this event forward, this conversation forward, and use it to stimulate conversation beyond this room, I think is a really important part of what's going to come out of tonight. So thank you again for being involved, and particularly want to thank Kylie and Daisy, the two other members of the Q Sport team with me. Thank you for helping me design and deliver what's been the first of a really important conversation. And I acknowledge there are other people in the room, in Ben and Anika as well, who've been a key part of building Q Sport to the point where we can launch a conversation like this as well. So thank you. Lastly, as a thank you to each of you, it's a school night. Your time is very valuable. Thank you for being here after hours, after a long day, and being a part of the conversation. Please keep talking about the things we've talked about here. Share these things to social media, post these things to friends. We'll produce the video for you, share that to your network, watch it back and grab the favourite bits of that. Please stay if you can, have a drink and a bite to eat. Keep talking with all of us. We'll see you in 2024, and in the meantime, safe journey home, and thanks again for being here tonight.
Sorry, Tim. I just wanted to also thank Tim. He's a tremendous leader in our state, and what you do for sport through these really interesting and innovative initiatives. This is the very thing that we need more of, just collectively getting together to talk quite deeply and meaningfully about many of the things that sport can do in our community. So, Tim, we're really lucky to have you here. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah.